You lost, old man, this ain't the DMV. What shocking turn could this quiet moment take? One of the salesmen muttered under his breath loud enough for the others to snicker. The old man didn't respond, just sat there quietly, coat folded across his lap, hands still steady like they'd held heavier things than disrespect. He waited 10 minutes, 20, a full hour, ignored, judged by his boots, his wrinkles, the silence he carried like a badge. Then the glass doors opened and the man who walked in didn't just own the showroom. What secret would unravel next? He called that old man Grandpa, and what happened next? Well, it rewrote every smug smirk in that building, because some legacies don't ask to be honored, they just walk in and remind the room who built it. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The morning sun had barely begun to stretch over the skyline of Charlotte, North Carolina, when Walter Granger stepped off the city bus with a small duffel bag in one hand and a folded cap in the other. His boots, scuffed but clean, touched the pavement with the quiet steadiness of a man who'd walked across both oceans and deserts without asking for much in return. At 79, Walter had the bearing of someone who'd stood for something once, not tall, not broad, but solid, his spine slightly stooped. From years of labor, still carried a kind of dignity. The world had forgotten how to see. He wore a plain olive jacket pressed the night before with a faded American flag patch on the shoulder. The collar was fraying, the zipper stuck halfway, but it was clean. He paused outside a shimmering glass building with the words Ashcroft Lux Motors shining in chrome over the entrance, the kind of place that sold dreams polished in midnight black and pearl white. German engineering, Italian leather, and American-sized payments. Walter didn't belong in places like this, he knew that. But he wasn't here to buy anything, he was here to surprise someone. Inside that building, somewhere among the gleaming rows of luxury sedans and coupes, worked his grandson, Cameron Ashcroft. Walter hadn't seen him in nearly 4 years, not since the funeral, not since the young man with 2 short sleeves and trembling hands had stood at the pulpit and whispered, "He raised me when no one else would," and then vanished back into the city that had swallowed him. Walter had thought about this visit for weeks, maybe longer. It had taken him 3 hours and 2 buses to get here from his quiet little rental on the edge of Lincoln County, but none of that mattered. Today was about one thing: family. He pulled open the tall glass door and stepped inside. Cool air met him instantly, conditioned, purified, and expensive. Jazz music played low from hidden speakers, the scent of leather, cologne, and freshly brewed espresso hung in the air like perfume. At a high-end hotel, behind a marble-top reception desk sat a young woman with a tight bun and a tighter smile. She didn't look up. Walter waited. He cleared his throat softly. "Excuse me, miss." She finally glanced up, eyes flickering across him in one practice sweep. Jacket, boots, age. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "The service entrance is in the back, sir." Walter blinked. "I'm not here for service, I'm here to see someone." She looked again, slower this time, still didn't smile. "This area is for customers. Do you have an appointment?" "No, ma'am," Walter said gently. "I'm just here to see my grandson, Cameron Ashcroft. He runs the place." Her brow twitched and then dismissal. "You can have a seat over there," she said, gesturing toward a sleek waiting area near the window. "Someone will be with you eventually." Walter nodded politely. "Thank you." He walked over to the low leather chair and eased himself down with a quiet grunt. The seat was too low, the kind that looked good in magazines, but punished knees older than 30. He adjusted his coat and folded his cap in his lap, and he waited. 5 minutes. 10. Nobody came. A group of salesmen gathered near the espresso machine, talking in low voices and laughing too loud. One of them, tall, hair slicked back, gold watch catching the light, glanced Walter's way and smirked. Another salesman leaned over and said something that made the others chuckle. "Probably here to use the bathroom and get a free cup of coffee," one of them whispered. They didn't know he could hear them, but he could. Walter didn't flinch. He'd heard worse in jungles with no names and deserts that never cooled down. He wasn't here for their approval, he was here for Cameron. He shifted in his seat and pulled a small photo from his inside pocket. It was faded and bent at the corners. In it, a much younger Walter knelt beside a boy, maybe 8 years old, holding a model plane together. The boy's cheeks were flushed, his hands covered in glue, and his smile wide. Missing teeth was real. He remembered that day. They'd built the plane on the porch using scrapwood and too much epoxy. Cameron had been so proud. He looked up again. No one came. An hour passed. No one spoke to him. Customers walked in suits and heels and phones in hand. They were greeted with sparkling water and compliments. Walter was invisible. The receptionist glanced at him once, frowned, and looked away. A new group of salesmen arrived. One of them, young, maybe 21, paused when he saw Walter sitting quietly in the corner. His name tag read Brady. He hesitated, then approached. "Sir," he said, careful. Walter looked up. "Do you need help?" "I'm just waiting for my grandson," Walter said with a warm nod. "Cameron Ashcroft." Brady blinked. "Mr. Ashcroft?" "Yes, sir, he owns the place, I believe." Brady's eyes widened just a little. Let me just a minute." He stepped away quickly. Walter didn't move. From behind the glass walls, The city shimmered under the late morning sun, cars passed, people bustled, life went on. He waited, then the showroom doors opened with a soft chime and everything changed. Cameron Ashcroft walked in, tall, pressed gray suit, silver tie, leather briefcase in one hand, and a phone in the other. His hair was sharp, his gait purposeful, his posture confident. He was the kind of man people stepped aside for. Brady met him halfway, talking fast, gesturing subtly toward the waiting area. Cameron slowed, lowered his phone, his eyes locked on the man by the window, and the world stopped turning. He stood frozen for just a second, then the briefcase fell to the ground, and Cameron ran, not walked. Grandpa, the salesman froze. Mid-sentence, the receptionist's jaw dropped. The room went silent, except for the sound of leather shoes hitting tile too fast. Walter stood a little stiffly and smiled. "Hey, kid." Cameron wrapped him in a tight hug, breath-catching. "You're really here," he said into his grandfather's shoulder. "You came all this way." Walter chuckled softly. "Took me a while, but I figured it was time." Cameron pulled back, eyes wet. "You didn't call." "I could have. Why didn't you let me know?" "I wanted it to be a surprise." Behind them, no one moved. Cameron turned slowly, scanning the stunned faces of his employees. He stepped back, keeping one arm around his grandfather. "Did any of you speak to him?" he asked. Silence. Brady started. Just now, sir." Cameron nodded slowly. "And before that?" "Nothing." He looked at Carly, the receptionist, her cheeks flushed. She lowered her eyes. "He said he was here to see you." She mumbled. "But he didn't have an appointment." Cameron looked at his grandfather again, at the boots, the jacket, the cap folded with care. Then he exhaled long and slow. "Everyone," he said, voice steady but cold. "This is Walter Granger, United States Army, retired, Bronze Star, Silver Star. He raised me when I had no one in the room." Shifted. "He didn't have an appointment," Cameron continued, "because he doesn't need one. Not here. Not anywhere I own." The silence cracked. Shame settled over the marble floor like fog. Walter just smiled gently and patted his grandson's shoulder. "No need to fuss," he said quietly. "I didn't come to make trouble." Cameron shook his head. "You came to the right place. The trouble was already here." He turned to the staff. "Clear the calendar, shut down the sales floor. I'll handle the calls." He looked at Carly. "You and I will talk later." Then to Brady, "Get my grandfather a cup of coffee, black, 2 sugars, bring it to my office." Brady nodded quickly and rushed off. Cameron picked up the briefcase he had dropped and turned to Walter. "Let's go upstairs." Walter raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're not too busy?" Cameron smiled, this time with warmth. "There's not a thing in the world more important than this." As they walked together through the stunned crowd, Walter glanced around at the glass, the chrome, the polished floors, and for the first time that day, someone opened a door for him. He stepped through it, not as a stranger, but as someone finally seen. The office on the second floor was quiet, too quiet considering the chaos it overlooked. Below, the showroom floor had fallen still, as if the presence of Walter Granger had shifted the axis of the entire building. Through the tall glass windows, sunlight spilled across marble, leather, and chrome. But up here, behind a thick walnut door with a brass nameplate reading Cameron Ashcroft, CEO, time moved differently. Walter sat carefully in a leather chair that seemed more sculpture than seat, the kind that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Cameron stood behind his desk, arms crossed, pacing slow, deliberate steps, still catching up to the reality of the moment. It had been 4 years, 4 long years of missed birthdays, unanswered calls, and half-written letters that never left a drawer. "Coffee's on the way," Cameron said, finally breaking the silence. "They'll bring up something to eat, too. You hungry?" Walter gave a soft shrug. "Not yet, just glad to see you." Cameron stopped walking, his jaw clenched. He turned to face the man who had once walked him to school in snowstorms, patched his jeans with duct tape, and sat beside him at high school graduation with a tear he had pretended wasn't there. "I didn't expect you," Cameron said. Walter nodded. "I know, I should have called." Cameron added, quieter this time. Walter looked at him gently. "But you didn't." It wasn't accusation, just fact. Cameron let out a breath and sank into the chair across from him. "Life got loud. Business took off after Mom passed. I didn't know what to say anymore." Walter studied him, the way his shoulders never quite relaxed, the way his eyes drifted back to the door as if still managing the room beyond. "Even now, didn't expect a call," Walter said. "I just needed to see with my own eyes that you're all right." Cameron hesitated, then laughed once, short and bitter. "You saw them down there? That's what all right looks like these days, I guess. Suits, sales charts, synthetic smiles." Walter didn't answer. He just let the silence hang thick with the weight of unsaid things. Moments later, Brady arrived balancing a tray with 2 steaming mugs and a plate of fresh scones. "Here you go," served black, 2 sugars, and they sent up the cranberry. One said, "It's your favorite." Walter nodded politely, appreciated. Brady turned to Cameron. "Let me know if you need anything else." Ashcroft. Cameron gave a curt nod and Brady left, the door clicking softly shut behind him. They sat for a moment sipping coffee that tasted expensive but impersonal. Cameron leaned back and looked at his grandfather. "You want the tour?" he asked, as if suddenly realizing he'd skipped the most basic welcome. Walter smiled. "Sure. You built all this. I'd like to see what kind of world you made." The 2 men walked the showroom slowly. This time, no one ignored them. Employees stood straighter, phones went away, conversations hushed as they passed. Walter moved At his own pace, stopping now and then to admire the vehicles, though not for their price tags or horsepower, he seemed more fascinated by the craftsmanship, the finish, the care and the curves. "Which one's your best seller?" he asked, resting a hand lightly on the hood of a jet-black Mercedes sedan. Cameron walked beside him. "Depends on the season, that one's mostly for executives. But our SUV line moves faster than anything. People like comfort more than speed these days." Walter nodded. "Can't blame them." They passed a line of pristine models, each parked at perfect angles under skylights that made the paint gleam like wet ink. "You remember the old truck?" Walter asked suddenly. Cameron paused. "Which one?" "The blue Ford '89 model, the one you used to play in like it was a spaceship?" Cameron smiled in spite of himself. "Had to climb up the tire just to reach the seat. Had a dent in the passenger door." Walter added. "You said it gave it personality." "I said it gave it character," Walter corrected, his voice tinged with warmth. They kept walking. Cameron guided him into the customer lounge, the executive conference room, the delivery bay, each more polished than the last. But it was when they reached the garage in the back, the service bay, that Walter's face changed. Here there was grit, mechanics in coveralls, the smell of grease and oil. Real work. One of the younger techs spotted them. "Mr. Ashcroft, this is your grandfather." Cameron nodded. "This is Walter Granger. He taught me how to rebuild a carburetor when I was 8. Walter raised an eyebrow. 7.5. "You had small hands, made it easier." The young mechanic laughed and Cameron shook his head. "Everyone out here works hard," he said, "but back then it was just you and that toolbox." Walter studied the room, then looked at Cameron. "You've done well," he said softly, but Cameron didn't smile. Instead, he looked down. "Have I?" Later that afternoon, they returned to the office. This time, it was Cameron who sat silently while Walter looked out the window. "It's funny," Cameron said finally, "I wanted to build something that mattered, a business, a name, something people respected." Walter turned. "You have, maybe," Cameron replied, "but I lost track of the reason somewhere along the way." He pulled open a drawer, took out a small wooden box, and set it between them. "I was going to send this last year," Cameron said, "but I didn't know if you'd want it." Walter opened the box. Inside sat an old photo, him and Cameron on the porch, same one from his jacket pocket now framed. Beside it was a pocket watch, silver, inscribed, "To the man who gave me everything and never asked for a thing." Walter said nothing, but his hand trembled as he closed the lid. "I kept thinking," Cameron said, voice low, "that if I made it big enough, you'd be proud, that maybe I could repay you." "You already did," Walter said. Cameron shook his head. "No, I didn't." He turned toward the window, the city reflected in the glass. "I let people treat you like furniture today, my staff, my space. I built all this and somehow forgot the man who taught me what integrity looks like." Walter's voice was gentle. "You remembered when it mattered." "I shouldn't have needed reminding." That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Cameron gathered his team in the main lobby. Everyone in sales, reception, marketing, stood in a loose circle, unsure what was coming. Walter sat quietly off to the side, sipping his second cup of coffee. Cameron stepped forward. "I'm going to tell you a story," he began, "about a man who raised me in a double-wide trailer on a veteran's pension, who fixed trucks with tools older than I was, who worked nights at a factory to make sure I had shoes for school." He looked at Walter. "A man who taught me how to stand up without ever raising his voice." The staff shifted, glancing among themselves. "Today, you all walked past him, ignored him, judged him. I'm not saying this to embarrass anyone, I'm saying this because it's unacceptable." He paused. "This business carries my name, but it was built on his shoulders." Cameron turned to Brady. "You saw something was off, you listened, that matters." Brady blinked, startled. Cameron nodded. "We'll talk more Monday." Then to Carly, "You'll start a new role effective immediately, training coordinator for veteran services. I expect a new onboarding module by Friday." Carly's face paled. "Sir, I didn't mean." "I know you didn't," he said simply, "but that's the problem." He turned back to the group. "From now on, every customer who walks through those doors will be treated like the person who raised me, whether they're in a three-piece suit or a jacket from 1972. Understood?" A few people nodded slowly, others joined. Walter just sat quietly, not smug, not angry, just present. As the night drew on, the staff trickled out. Cameron and Walter sat together on the balcony outside the second floor, the city lights flickering below like distant stars. "You going to fire her?" Walter asked casually, nodding toward the empty lobby. "Carly?" "No, I think she learned something today." Walter grunted. "Shame's a good teacher." Cameron laughed. "You ever consider working HR?" Walter shook his head. "Had enough people problems in the army." They sat in silence again, then Cameron spoke. "I want you to stay a while, not just today." Walter looked at him. "I've got the guest house, it's not much, but it's private. I'll clear the schedule next week. You and we've got catching up to do." Walter didn't answer right away, then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the photo again. The same one Cameron had framed. He laid it flat on the table between them. "You know what I see when I look at this?" Walter asked. Cameron leaned forward. I see a boy who always looked for meaning, Walter said. Even when it was hard, you found it once, kiddy, you'll find it again. Cameron nodded quietly, moved. Walter took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair, watching the sky turn from orange to gray. The city buzzed, but up here, between two generations, tied by more than blood, there was only stillness and the feeling that something had finally shifted toward healing, toward home. The following week unfolded slowly, like dust settling after a long, heavy wind. Walter Granger stayed in the guest house behind Cameron's home, a cozy brick structure nestled behind a row of cypress trees. It was simple, wood-paneled walls, a twin bed, a coffee maker that sputtered like an old truck, but it suited him. Every morning he made coffee by 6. Every night he sat on the porch, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, watching the city lights blink like signals from another world. Cameron, meanwhile, dove into the work of redemption. He didn't just update policies, he rewrote them, introduced mandatory training for all staff on veteran engagement, customer dignity, and trauma-informed communication. He even changed the company's mission statement, adding a bold line at the end: respect is not earned by wealth, it's deserved by service. And on Wednesday, he made a decision that would test everything. He picked up the phone and called the board end-of-quarter presentation. He told them, I want every partner here in person. They didn't question it. Ashcroft Lux Motors had tripled its market share over the last 2 years. When the owner called, you came. The presentation was scheduled for Friday at 9 a.m., and from the moment that meeting hit the calendar, something in the building changed. Whispers began, the air grew tense, some employees adjusted quickly to the new policies. Brady was eager to help, even volunteered for the new Veteran Priority Initiative, but others bristled, especially Brandon Keller. Brandon, the senior sales manager, had been with the company since day one. He liked his commission checks, he liked his custom-tailored suits and his corner office view, but what he didn't like was being corrected in front of the team after what happened with Walter. He hadn't apologized, not really, and as Friday approached, Brandon's frustration turned to calculation. On Thursday evening, while most of the team filed out for the night, he stayed late, clicking through emails, checking old contracts, and dialing one number in particular. Yeah, he said, voice low, I think it's time we talk. Friday came sharp and cold. The lobby buzzed with tension. The board members arrived in black Escalades, greeted with practiced smiles and fancy coffee. Cameron stood near the entrance, greeting each one with firm handshakes and clipped conversation. Walter stood off to the side, hands folded over his cane. He wore a clean button-up, pressed slacks, and his army lapel pin. Still no tie. He never did like them. Cameron gestured toward him. I'd like to introduce you all to the man who raised me. Most nodded politely. A few murmured things like pleasure or thank you for your service, but they were already thinking about quarterly graphs and profit projections. They didn't know yet what was coming. They took their seats in the upstairs conference room, frosted glass, 12 leather chairs, a digital display humming quietly at one end. Cameron stood at the head of the table. He took a breath and started. Let me begin with the obvious, he said. This quarter's revenue was up 12%, we closed 2 new corporate contracts and added 4 high-profile clients to our portfolio. He clicked the remote, charts lit up the wall, applause broke out. But I'm not here to talk about that, he continued. The room fell still. I want to talk about who we are and, more importantly, who we've forgotten. He clicked again. A photo filled the screen. Walter sitting alone in the showroom, coat folded over his lap, cap in hand. Several board members leaned forward. This man walked into our building 2 weeks ago. He was ignored, mocked, shuffled aside because of how he looked. Cameron stepped away from the screen. This man is my grandfather, but even if he weren't, he deserved better. He deserves respect, the same respect any veteran, any elder, any human being deserves when they walk through our doors. Silence. This company bears my name, Cameron said, but it's built on his shoulders. He clicked again. This time the screen showed black and white photos. Walter in uniform, Walter carrying Cameron as a child, Walter rebuilding a pickup engine with bare, calloused hands. From this day forward, Cameron said, Ashcroft Lux Motors will dedicate itself to restoring that respect. We'll launch an outreach program for military families, we'll allocate 10% of all quarterly bonuses to veteran support initiatives, and most of all, we'll begin hiring and training veterans for sales, service, and leadership roles across every branch of our operation. One board member, an older man with silver hair and a skeptical expression, leaned back. Is this about profit, Cameron, or guilt? Cameron didn't blink. It's about purpose. And what does that cost us? Brandon stood suddenly. He hadn't spoken until now. Actually, he said, sliding a folder onto the table, it may cost more than we think. Everyone turned. Cameron's jaw tightened. Brandon tapped the folder. I did some digging. Legal reviewed the bylaws this morning, and it turns out you made these changes, hiring shifts, budget reallocations, without full board approval. Cameron's stomach dropped. Those changes are still within executive rights, he said calmly. Not if they materially impact shareholder dividends, Brandon replied, which, according to the preliminary Q2 forecast, these adjustments do. The room buzzed. Brandon looked around, playing his moment like a man who had rehearsed every word. Look, he said. I respect the story, I do, it's touching, but we're running a business here, not a memorial. We can't sacrifice long-term stability to make up for one bad afternoon. Walter shifted in his seat. Eyes narrowing, Brandon glanced toward him. No offense, sir, I mean that sincerely. You don't, Walter said, his voice cut the room like a wire snapping. Everyone went quiet. Walter rose slowly. Cameron moved to help, but he waved him off. I've seen men bleed for each other in places so dark you had to close your eyes just to see straight. Walter said, I've watched boys bury their best friends with trembling hands and then walk into enemy fire to protect someone else's son. He stepped closer to the table. So don't talk to me about sacrifice unless you've paid that price. Brandon stiffened. Walter looked around the room, calm, steady. Every generation asks itself what kind of legacy it wants to leave, what kind of name it wants to carry. Some choose wealth, some choose comfort. He looked at Cameron, and some remember what it's like to be seen. He placed his hand gently on Cameron's shoulder. I came here to see what kind of man my grandson had become. He turned to the board. Now I see what kind of company he wants to build. He stepped back and sat down. The room was silent again, this time, not out of shock, but out of shame. Cameron straightened his jacket. I'm willing to hold a vote, he said. If the board decides this vision isn't right, I'll accept that. He paused, but I won't stay. There was a gasp. The silver-haired board member sat up. You're saying you'd walk away from your own company, if I can't run it with integrity? Yes. The moment stretched thin, then a voice broke through. It was Lisa McDaniel, the newest board member, young, sharp, until now silent. I vote yes, she said. For what? For the veteran initiative, for everything? It's the right thing. One by one, the others followed. Yes, yes, Ashcroft's earned the right to lead this, yes, until only Brandon remained. He looked around, then looked down. Fine, he muttered. Yes. Cameron nodded once, then turned toward the window. Outside, the city stretched wide and bright, and for the first time in years, it felt like home again. That night, Walter packed up his things in the guest house, folded his clothes with care, wiped down the counter like it was his own place. Cameron knocked lightly on the door. You're leaving? Walter nodded. I've stayed long enough. You sure? I saw what I needed to see. Cameron stepped inside. I'm going to rename the outreach program, he said. The Granger Initiative, for you? Walter chuckled softly. That'll confuse folks. They'll think it's for someone important. It is. They stood facing each other. No more speeches, no more boardrooms, just two men connected by blood and time. I'm proud of you, Walter said. Cameron's voice cracked. You made me who I am. Walter picked up his bag and his cap. You found the rest on your own. As Walter walked out to the waiting car, the staff gathered at the entrance. Brady handed him a hot coffee. 2 sugars. Carly nodded respectfully. I'm sincere. Even Brandon stood near the back, silent, but not smug. Cameron opened the car door for him, then reached into his pocket and pressed something into Walter's hand. It was the old silver pocket watch. I was going to keep it, Cameron said, but I think it still belongs to you. Walter opened it. The inscription glinted in the early dusklight. He closed the lid and smiled. Take care of this place, Cameron. I will. Walter stepped into the car, and as it pulled away down the quiet street, the city lights caught the rear window just right, and for a moment, Cameron could see his own reflection beside his grandfather's. 2 generations, 1 story, and a legacy finally honored. The first thing Cameron did after Walter left was go home and sit alone in silence. No phone, no laptop, no wine or streaming noise to fill the room, just quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you take stock, that strips away performance and presentation and leaves you staring down the question most of us spend years trying not to ask: what will I be remembered for? He stared at the pocket watch sitting on his desk, the one Walter had returned to him in the final moment. Despite Cameron insisting it still belonged to him, beneath the silver lid, the inscription seemed to breathe under the soft lamplight. To the man who gave me everything and never asked for a thing. Cameron closed the lid. This company wasn't built for cars, not really. It had always been about image, status, applause. Now it would be about legacy. Over the next month, Ashcroft Lux Motors changed, not in flashy ways, but in quiet, steady ones. A new section was added to the showroom, a corner alcove set beneath a soft spotlight framed with reclaimed barnwood and engraved steel. Above the alcove was a sign in burnished bronze, the Granger Honor Wall. Inside, mounted under glass, a folded American flag, a photograph of Walter in uniform, and beside it, a small plaque with a simple line: he walked in quietly and reminded us who we serve. Beneath the plaque sat a book, leather bound, hand-stitched. Visitors were invited to sign it. Veterans, family members, even strangers moved by what the space stood for. Some signed with their names, some with the names of those they'd lost, some with just a single word: seen, respected, homed. Cameron read every entry. He kept a copy at his desk. The Granger Initiative launched 2 weeks later, a full veterans hiring pipeline, training, scholarships, housing support, partnerships. Every veteran hired received not only a competitive salary, but a personalized plaque mounted in their workspace with their branch of service and a welcome note signed by Cameron himself. Veteran customers received priority access and customized financing. Every first Friday of the month, Ashcroft hosted Quiet Hour, a calm, No pressure sales window with lowered lights and soft music designed specifically for vets with PTSD. It wasn't about profit, it was about dignity, and for the first time since Cameron opened his doors, the building didn't feel like a showroom, it felt like a cause. Brady Young, still learning, became the company's first veteran liaison. Under Walter's influence, he began asking every customer one quiet question during the buying process: is there someone in your life who served? And if the answer was yes, they offered to engrave a custom plate inside the glove box of their new car with that person's name. Small but meaningful. Within weeks, over 100 cars left the lot with silent memorials tucked behind the dash. Customers didn't ask for discounts, they just asked for a place that saw what mattered. Not everyone adapted as quickly. Brandon submitted his resignation 2 months later. He didn't do it out of spite, not in the end. He walked into Cameron's office, sat down, and simply said, "This isn't my world anymore." Cameron didn't argue, didn't scold. He stood, shook his hand, and said, "Thank you for what you did, right?" Brandon paused at the door. "Your grandfather," he said quietly, "he made me look in a mirror I didn't like. I guess maybe that's what respect really is, when someone says what you needed to hear, even if it cuts." Cameron nodded once, then Brandon left. Some goodbyes aren't bitter, just overdue. And Walter, he kept his word. He stayed out of the spotlight. Out in Lincoln County, his life returned to quiet. Early coffee, volunteer shifts at the VFW, wood shop projects. He never rushed, but once a week, without fail, a small envelope would arrive in Cameron's mailbox. No return address, just a card, each with a single sentence handwritten: "Don't forget your mother's hands, don't let shiny things make you dull, legacy doesn't shout, it waits to be honored." And Cameron would tape each one to his office wall above the thermostat beside the inventory reports next to the old framed dealership license. One Saturday, a customer walked in and asked, "What's with the notes?" Cameron smiled. "They keep me aligned." The story, of course, got out. Someone snapped a photo of Walter's honor wall and posted it on a veterans forum. That post got picked up by a local journalist, then a national one, and one Thursday morning, Cameron woke up to find an email in his inbox from a producer at a major network. They wanted to do a segment, America Remembers. They offered lights, cameras, the works, but Cameron declined. He sent a simple response: "Heroes don't need press, just presence." Instead, he spent that day polishing the brass rail that led to the Granger wall himself. One rainy morning, almost 5 months after that first day, Walter walked in and the doorbell above the showroom rang softly. Cameron looked up from his desk. A man in a worn flannel jacket and clean work boots stepped in, eyes cautious, movements slow. He looked around unsure. Brady stepped forward with a smile. "Welcome in, sir. What brings you by?" The man held out a weathered photo, black and white edges curled. It showed 3 young soldiers. One was Walter, that man. The customer said quietly, "He saved my life in '71. I heard he came through here." Brady nodded, eyes softening. "He did. He's family." Cameron appeared beside him. "You're welcome here, sir." The man blinked, then smiled and walked toward the Granger wall like he'd been heading there all along. The year rolled forward, the showroom flourished, but more than that, the culture changed. There was less flash, more substance, less rush, more listening. And one morning, as sunlight spilled through the east windows, a child pressed her hand to the glass of the Granger wall. She couldn't read the words, she just saw the flag, the photo, the face of a man who looked like someone's grandfather. Her father leaned down. "That man helped build this place," he said. The little girl nodded solemnly, then whispered, "He looks kind." And in that moment across the city, as Walter sipped his coffee in a rocking chair, worn smooth with memory, he smiled. 2 years later, Walter passed quietly in his sleep. The funeral was private per his wishes. No eulogies, no uniforms, just family. Cameron stood beside the pine box that Walter himself had helped sand years earlier, laid a hand on the top, whispered something no one heard, and when it was over, he went home, took down every letter from Walter's wall, framed each one, and placed them one by one in a gallery that no customer saw, but every employee passed by each morning. Words from the man who reminded them what mattered. A few weeks later, Cameron hosted a ceremony. No press, no ribbon cutting, just a quiet gathering. They unveiled a new foundation, the Walter Granger Legacy Fund, its purpose helping veterans transition into civilian life with job training, mentorship, and emotional support. The tagline: "Some men build businesses, others build men." That night, alone in his office, Cameron stood in front of the Granger wall. The lights were low, the building was quiet outside, the city buzzed like always, but inside the air felt sacred. He touched the glass gently, then whispered, "I hope I made you proud." And if the world had been listening, if it had leaned in just close enough, it might have heard a whisper returned, not from the glass, not from the flag, but from the soul of every quiet, forgotten man who ever waited in silence to be seen. "You did, kid, you did." In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way. Often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition, some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.